In a small town surrounded by low hills and quiet forests, there lived a man named Tom. Tom was not rich, nor did he seek attention from anyone. He worked at the town's repair shop, fixing broken tools, doors, and machines. People in the town knew him as quiet and serious. He rarely talked to neighbors unless it was necessary, and he liked to keep his life simple. Most people found him unusual because he spent so much time alone. Behind Tom's modest house was a wooden shed that looked ordinary from the outside. Its paint was slightly faded, and the roof had small cracks where water sometimes dripped. But unlike the rest of the property, the shed was a mystery. Tom worked on it every day before winter, carrying wood, metal sheets, blankets, and other supplies inside. He never invited anyone in, and the neighbors often whispered about it. "Why does he spend so much time there?" asked Mark, a man who lived across the street. He was curious but also a little amused. "It looks like a tiny bunker," said Lena, shaking her head. She lived nearby and often walked past Tom's house on her way to the bakery. "I cannot understand why someone needs such a place in winter. We survive without it." Children who played near Tom's house called it his secret cave. They dared each other to knock on the heavy wooden door, hoping to get a peek inside. But Tom never opened the door. When asked about it, he only smiled politely and said, "It is just a place to stay warm in winter." In truth, the shed was not just a simple shed. Tom had spent months building a winter room inside it. The walls were thick and insulated. He had reinforced them with boards and extra layers of material to keep the cold out. The floor was raised above the ground, and the roof had extra insulation to prevent snow from causing leaks. Inside, there was a small heater, a table, chairs, warm blankets, food supplies, bottled water, and even a radio. Tom remembered harsh winters from his childhood. He had grown up in a village where snowstorms often blocked roads for days. People would huddle in cold houses, hoping for the storm to pass. He remembered nights when the wind howled outside, shaking windows and doors. Food was limited, and many neighbors would struggle to stay warm. Tom never wanted to feel that helpless again. That was why he prepared. When the first cold winds of winter arrived, the neighbors started noticing the changes in Tom. He carried more supplies into the shed every evening. Mark watched him one morning as he stacked boxes of canned food inside. "Why do you need so much food?" Mark asked jokingly, leaning on his fence. Tom smiled calmly. "It is just better to be prepared. Winter can be stronger than it looks." "Stronger than usual? It is only a few days of snow," Mark laughed. Tom did not reply. He continued arranging blankets and checking his small heater. The neighbors often mocked him. They whispered about how serious he was and called him strange. "Tom is building a fortress for no reason," Lena said to her friends. "He is wasting time and money. The snow will never be that bad." But Tom did not care. Every day, he made small improvements. He added stronger locks to the door, reinforced the windows, and even made a small stove for warmth. He wanted everything to be ready in case the storm was stronger than the weather reports suggested. As November passed, the sky began to change. Clouds gathered, and the wind started to blow colder. Trees bent under the gusts, and snow began to fall lightly. Some neighbors cleared their driveways and returned inside, smiling and confident. They laughed at Tom when they saw him carrying more supplies into his shed. "Maybe he is preparing for a snowstorm that will never come," Lena said, shaking her head. Mark chuckled. "I hope he invites us. It could be fun to see his fortress." Tom continued working quietly. He never argued, never tried to convince anyone, and never showed annoyance. Inside his winter room, he felt safe and calm. The heater kept the room warm, the blankets were ready, and the food was organized. He tested the radio, making sure it worked in case the power went out. One evening, a group of children ran past his house, laughing and shouting about a small snowman they had built. Tom watched them from his window. He remembered how lonely winters had been for him as a child. Even with fun outside, the nights were cold and dark. He wanted to make sure he would never feel that fear again. The townspeople continued with their routines. They shoveled snow, went to the shops, and stayed warm in their own homes. Many still thought Tom's preparations were unnecessary. "He is just wasting his time," Lena said to her neighbor. But then the radio reports began to change. The weather station warned of a strong blizzard moving toward the region. Snow was expected to fall heavily, and the winds would be strong. Roads could become blocked, and power might be cut for days. Some people began to worry slightly. Others still laughed, and said the storm would pass without trouble. Tom listened quietly. He knew the storm would be difficult, but he had already prepared. He carried extra wood for the stove and more blankets into his winter room. He checked the water supply and counted the food. Everything was ready for at least a week of heavy snow. The first night of the storm arrived. The wind howled like a wild animal. Snow hit the windows with force, and branches scraped against houses. The town was quickly covered in white. Roads disappeared under the snow, and some cars were trapped near homes. The next morning, the storm had grown stronger. Neighbors looked out their windows, surprised at how much snow had fallen. Trees bent under the weight, and the cold was sharper than anyone had expected. Mark and Lena realized they might have underestimated the storm. Mark peeked out the window and saw Tom's shed standing strong, covered with snow but not damaged. He remembered the jokes he had made and felt a little uneasy. Lena also noticed the shed. For the first time, she wondered if Tom had been right to prepare. Inside the winter room, Tom sat comfortably near the heater. The storm raged outside, but he was warm, safe, and calm. He listened to the radio reports, checking updates about road closures and power outages. The town would struggle through the day, but he was ready. The neighbors continued to watch the shed, now in a different light. The same place they had mocked might be the only safe spot for some of them if the storm worsened. Tom, quiet and prepared, continued to organize his space. He did not gloat or boast. He only smiled calmly, knowing that preparation and care could make all the difference when winter became severe. That morning marked the beginning of the blizzard. The town had never seen so much snow this early in winter. Roads would close, and people might need help. Tom's winter room, once mocked and laughed at, was ready for whatever the storm would bring. The neighbors, once doubtful, now began to wonder. Could Tom's strange shed actually save lives during this storm? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain. Tom's quiet determination and careful planning had made him ready for what others ignored. The blizzard grew stronger as the day went on. Snow fell in thick layers, covering rooftops, streets, and cars. The wind whipped through the town, bending trees and sending small branches flying. People who had been confident in the morning now hurried to finish chores, shoveled snow, and tried to secure their homes. Many realized they were not prepared for the storm at all. Mark struggled to clear his driveway. The snow fell faster than he could shovel. Every time he lifted a shovel full of snow, more drifted back onto the ground. His hands were numb, his face red from the cold, and his boots soaked. He looked toward Tom's house and the wooden shed behind it. The structure seemed calm and safe, untouched by the storm. For the first time, Mark thought about the weeks he had spent mocking Tom for his preparations. Lena had similar thoughts. She watched from her window as snow piled against fences and doors. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and shook her head. Her phone kept buzzing with weather warnings. She knew the storm could last for days. Panic started to creep into her mind. She had food for only a couple of meals and no extra blankets or water. She suddenly wished she had prepared like Tom. Meanwhile, Tom moved calmly inside his winter room. The small heater filled the space with warmth, and the blankets and pillows kept him comfortable. The room was small but perfectly organized. Food was stacked neatly on shelves, water bottles lined one corner, and the radio provided updates from the weather station. Tom listened carefully, noting which areas were experiencing power outages and which roads were blocked. He remembered the winters of his childhood. Back then, storms like this would trap families inside their homes for days. Some homes had no heating, no extra food, and people suffered. Tom had promised himself he would never face such helplessness again. That promise had guided every nail he hammered, every board he placed, and every plan he made for this winter room. Outside, the storm showed no signs of slowing down. Snow piled higher, sometimes reaching knee level. The wind blew so strongly that even people walking on cleared paths struggled to move. Children who had played in the snow earlier now sat by their windows, watching the storm in silence. By late afternoon, the town began to realize the seriousness of the situation. Cars were abandoned on streets as drivers could not continue through the heavy snow. Some houses lost power, and families huddled near fireplaces or small electric heaters that barely worked. The cold seeped through walls, and blankets were not enough to stay warm. Mark tried to call his neighbors, but the phone lines were busy. He walked outside, hoping to find help, but the wind pushed him back. Snow fell so heavily that he could barely see more than a few feet ahead. The streets were almost impassable. He stopped near Tom's shed, shivering from the cold and exhaustion. He stared at the heavy door, remembering the jokes he had made. Finally, he knocked. The sound echoed faintly against the thick walls. Tom opened the door calmly. His face was warm with a gentle smile, but his eyes showed understanding. "You should come in," he said. "It is too dangerous outside." Mark stepped inside, shaking and cold. Immediately, he felt the warmth from the heater and the comfort of the blankets. He looked around in surprise. The small winter room was cozy, organized, and safe. Cans of food, bottles of water, and extra blankets were neatly stacked. A small stove added extra warmth, and the radio continued to play updates. I didn't know it would be like this," Mark said, still catching his breath. He looked at Tom with a mix of respect and embarrassment. I should have prepared like you." Tom only smiled. "There is still time to stay safe. Come in, sit, and rest. We can plan for the next days together." Inside, Mark felt relief for the first time that day. The blizzard raged outside, but he was safe. He wrapped himself in a blanket and drank some warm water. The warmth and safety of the room were a contrast to the chaos outside. Soon, Lena appeared at the door. She had walked carefully through the snow, holding a small bag of necessities. Her cheeks were red from the cold, and her hands were numb. "Tom, may I come in?" she asked. Her voice was quiet but hopeful. Tom nodded. "Of course. The storm is too strong outside. Sit and warm yourself." Lena stepped inside. She looked around the winter room and gasped softly. "It is perfect," she said. "I can't believe you prepared this. I laughed at you before, but now I see how smart you were." Tom shook his head. "It is not about being smart. It is about care. If a storm is strong, it can be dangerous. Being ready is the only way to stay safe." Outside, the snow continued to fall. The wind blew fiercely, rattling the windows and making the trees bend dangerously. Power lines swayed, and some fell, leaving parts of the town without electricity. People who had stayed in their homes were beginning to realize how unprepared they were. Inside Tom's winter room, the three of them shared food and warm drinks. Tom showed them how to ration supplies, keep the heater safe, and monitor the radio for updates. Mark and Lena listened carefully, realizing how much preparation mattered. They had thought the storm would pass quickly, but it was clear it could last for days. Even in the small space, Tom had thought of everything. He had games to keep people occupied, books for reading, and enough blankets for everyone. The room was simple, but it was perfect for surviving the storm. As night fell, the blizzard became stronger. Snow piled high against the shed walls. The wind howled through the town like a wild animal, and the darkness outside was almost complete. Inside, the three of them were warm and safe. They talked quietly, sharing stories and laughter to pass the time. Mark admitted, "I should have listened to you before. I mocked you, but now I see that preparation is everything." Lena nodded. "I never realized how important it is to plan. You saved us, Tom. I am so grateful." Tom smiled gently. It is not about being praised. It is about staying safe. Today, we are safe, and that is what matters. Outside, the storm raged on, covering the town with thick snow. Trees bent under the weight, and some rooftops were barely visible. Roads were blocked, and people who had not prepared faced danger. Inside the winter room, warmth and light remained. Tom, Mark, and Lena sat together, safe from the storm. The room that had once been mocked and laughed at had become a refuge. It was a small space, but it held safety, care, and hope. The blizzard would continue for hours, perhaps even days. But inside the winter room, no one needed to fear the cold. Tom had prepared, and now others could survive because of his foresight. As the night deepened, Tom looked at the windows, listening to the wind. He knew the storm was powerful, but he also knew that preparation and calmness made all the difference. Outside, the town struggled, but inside the small wooden shed, life continued safely. The winter room, once hidden and mocked, had become a place of hope, warmth, and security. The blizzard continued into its second day. Snow fell in thick sheets, and the wind blew so hard that even the tallest trees bent under its force. Streets were buried, cars were trapped, and the town began to feel isolated. Most people stayed inside their homes, watching the storm from windows, shivering under blankets, and hoping it would end soon. Tom's winter room remained calm, warm, and safe. Inside, he moved quietly, checking the heater and the food supplies. Mark and Lena were already awake, wrapped in blankets, sipping warm tea. The storm outside was louder than anything they had ever experienced. Snow hit the walls like small drums, and the wind howled through the town. "Can it really get worse?" Mark asked, shivering despite the warmth inside. Tom shook his head. "It might. Storms like this are unpredictable. That is why we stay inside and stay safe." Lena looked out the small window of the shed. The snow had piled high. A street lamp across the road was almost completely covered. She realized that walking outside would be impossible. "I am glad we are here," she said quietly. "If we had stayed at home, it would have been dangerous." Tom nodded. Preparation matters. The storm will pass, but the unprepared will struggle. By midday, the town began facing serious challenges. Snow blocked roads completely. Emergency vehicles could not reach some houses. Many families ran out of food or could not heat their homes. Power outages left homes dark and cold. People who had laughed at Tom's shed now realized how smart he had been to prepare. Mark and Lena listened to the radio updates with concern. The announcer said that snow could continue for another day, and winds could reach dangerous speeds. "We need to stay here as long as the storm lasts," Tom advised calmly. Outside, the wind pushed piles of snow across the streets. Trees cracked under the weight of the snow, sending branches falling onto roads. Mailboxes disappeared under drifts, and cars were buried. Many neighbors who had stayed home now realized they had not prepared properly. Some ran out of food. Others were unable to keep warm because heaters did not work without electricity. Inside the winter room, Tom moved supplies carefully. He counted food, checked water bottles, and refilled the heater's fuel. Every small action made the room safer and more comfortable. Mark and Lena watched him, impressed by his organization and calmness. "I never imagined someone could be this prepared," Lena said. "You thought of everything. Even the games and books make it easier to wait out the storm." Tom smiled gently. "It is not about thinking ahead of others. It is about being ready for what nature can bring. The storm is powerful, but we are safe here. That is all that matters." The afternoon grew colder, and the storm showed no sign of stopping. Snow drifted against the shed's walls, rising like small hills. The windows of the winter room were covered in frost, and the wind rattled the wooden door. Outside, the town was a frozen maze. Streets disappeared under snow, and movement was nearly impossible. Mark decided to look outside briefly, just to understand the scale of the storm. He opened the door carefully, and a wall of wind and snow hit him. He could barely see the shed across the yard. The cold stung his face, and snow clung to his clothes instantly. He quickly closed the door and stepped back inside. "This storm is worse than I imagined," he said, catching his breath. "I never thought winter could feel like this." Tom nodded. "Storms can be stronger than we expect. That is why it is important to prepare before they arrive." Lena carefully unpacked some of the supplies Tom had stored. She found blankets, warm tea, snacks, and even extra jackets. "I should have prepared this way at home," she said. "We are lucky to be here." As evening approached, the storm grew even stronger. The wind howled like a living creature, and snow covered everything in white. Outside, people who had stayed home were struggling. Some houses had weak walls and poor insulation, making it almost impossible to stay warm. Others had run out of food or water. Tom, Mark, and Lena stayed together in the winter room. They shared stories, sipped warm drinks, and played simple games to keep their minds busy. Despite the storm outside, the room was peaceful. The small space, which had once been mocked by neighbors, was now a haven of safety and comfort. At one point, Mark admitted, "I cannot believe I laughed at you before. You saved us without even thinking twice." Tom smiled. "It is not about saving others for praise. It is about being ready. Preparation keeps us safe when nature is at its strongest." The night arrived, darker and colder than any night the town had seen in years. The blizzard created white walls outside, making it impossible to see anything beyond a few feet. People who had not prepared were now facing fear and cold. Some families huddled together with no heat, while others rationed the little food they had. Inside the winter room, warmth continued to spread from the heater. Blankets, food, and water were enough for all three of them. Tom checked the radio and noted that the storm could continue for another day. Even though the night was frightening outside, they were safe inside. Lena, wrapped in a thick blanket, looked at Tom. "You thought of everything," she said quietly. "Even the small things make this place perfect for a storm like this." Tom nodded. "Small things matter. If we can survive comfortably and safely, the storm loses its power over us." Mark, sitting by the heater, added, "I wish I had thought like you before. I would have prepared my house and my family better." Tom smiled gently. "It is never too late to learn. Even in storms, we can help others if we are ready and calm." Outside, the blizzard showed no mercy. Snow piled higher against the walls, making the shed look like a tiny fortress buried in white. Trees creaked and cracked under the weight of snow. Power lines swayed dangerously, and roads were completely blocked. Many neighbors faced fear, hunger, and cold. Inside the winter room, however, life continued normally. The heater hummed quietly. Food and water were abundant. Blankets and pillows kept everyone warm. Even the storm's howling wind could not reach them. For the first time, Mark and Lena understood the value of preparation, foresight, and calmness in the face of danger. As the night deepened, the storm reached its peak. The town was trapped under snow, and the blizzard would continue for hours, perhaps even a full day. Outside, people who had ignored warnings struggled to survive. Inside, Tom, Mark, and Lena remained warm, safe, and calm. The winter room, once mocked and laughed at, had become a refuge in a harsh and dangerous storm. Tom looked at the small window. The snow covered everything he could see, but he felt peace. The room had been prepared carefully, and it could withstand the worst the storm could bring. He knew that after the blizzard, people might finally understand why preparation was important. For now, the three of them sat together. They were safe, warm, and well-fed. The storm was strong, but it could not touch them inside the winter room. It had become more than a simple shed. It was a symbol of care, foresight, and survival. The blizzard roared through the town, but inside, life continued in calm and safety. Tom had built more than walls and blankets. He had built security, hope, and a reminder that preparation could change everything in the face of nature's power. The storm had entered its third day. Outside, the town was almost unrecognizable. Snow covered every street, every car, and even some rooftops. Trees bent under the weight of the snow, and several branches had fallen onto fences and driveways. The wind was relentless, whipping through the town with a force that made it almost impossible to walk outside. Inside Tom's winter room, life was calm and warm. The heater hummed steadily, blankets kept everyone comfortable, and food supplies were plentiful. Mark and Lena had grown more relaxed. They had spent the previous night talking, playing small games, and listening to the radio for updates. The small wooden shed, once mocked and ignored, had become a sanctuary. "I can't imagine how others are coping outside," Mark said quietly. "Most of them were not prepared for this." Lena nodded, looking out the frost-covered window. "I saw Mr. Allen trying to shovel his driveway earlier. He must have spent hours, and he still didn't finish. Some of the older neighbors might not manage at all." Tom considered the situation. The storm was expected to continue for another day, and many people in the town were vulnerable. "We are safe here," he said calmly. "But others are struggling. We can help when it is safe to go outside." The radio crackled with updates. Roads were blocked, and power lines had gone down in several parts of town. Emergency services were trying to reach the affected areas, but many streets were impassable. People trapped in their homes were calling friends and neighbors for help. The realization that preparation could save lives was clear to Mark and Lena. By midday, the storm slowed slightly, though the snow still fell heavily. Tom decided to plan for the first helping mission. He checked the heater, prepared extra blankets, and packed some food for anyone they might encounter. Mark and Lena watched in amazement. Tom had thought of everything, from warmth to nourishment, ensuring no one would be left in danger if they ventured outside. "I never thought I would see someone prepared like this," Lena said, tying her scarf tightly around her neck. "You have thought of everything. Even when others laughed, you stayed ready." Tom smiled. "It is not about being praised. It is about being careful and thinking ahead. Nature can be powerful, and it does not wait for anyone." Around afternoon, the storm showed a brief lull. Snow still fell, but the wind eased slightly. Visibility improved just enough to attempt movement outside. Tom opened the door of the winter room and looked at the world beyond. Snow had piled against the shed, nearly reaching the roof in some places. The streets were invisible under thick drifts, and rooftops were barely visible through the white haze. Mark and Lena followed Tom cautiously. He handed them thick blankets and explained how to move carefully. "Step slowly, check for weak spots in the snow, and always stay close," he instructed. "We must be careful." Their first destination was the house of Mr. Allen, an elderly man who lived 2 blocks away. His home had weak insulation and no backup supplies. Tom had seen him earlier through the frosted window, trying to dig his way out. Now, they could help. The walk was slow and exhausting. Snow reached up to their knees, and every step required effort. The wind blew sharply, making it difficult to see. Mark and Lena held onto each other and followed Tom's lead. He had memorized the safest path through the snow, avoiding fallen branches and hidden obstacles. When they reached Mr. Allen's house, they found him shivering near the doorway. His blankets were thin, and he had almost run out of food. Relief washed over him as he saw Tom and the others. "Thank you," he whispered. "I did not know how I would get through this." Tom helped him into the safety of the winter room. Mark handed him a warm blanket, and Lena gave him a cup of tea. The elderly man sank into a chair, grateful and overwhelmed. For the first time, he realized the value of being prepared for a storm. "Mr. Allen, you are safe now," Tom said calmly. "We will help others too. But first, rest and stay warm." Word began to spread that Tom's shed was a safe place. A few neighbors managed to reach the area, struggling through snow and wind. Each one was welcomed into the winter room, given warmth, food, and blankets. People who had laughed at Tom's preparations now understood their importance. By evening, the winter room had become a small refuge for several townspeople. Children played quietly near the heater, wrapped in blankets. Adults shared stories and food. Everyone admired the organization and care Tom had put into the space. What had once been a private shed mocked by neighbors was now a sanctuary during the worst winter storm in years. Mark whispered to Lena, "I never imagined a small shed could do so much." "It is incredible." Lena nodded. He thought ahead while we all ignored the warnings. "Now, this room is saving lives." Tom continued to move calmly through the room. He refilled water bottles, checked the heater, and ensured food was shared fairly. He gave advice quietly to anyone who needed it, showing them how to stay warm, ration supplies, and remain safe until the storm passed. As the night fell, the blizzard returned with full force. The wind howled, rattling the walls, and snow drifted higher than before. Streets disappeared entirely, and movement outside was impossible. Those who had not found refuge faced danger and cold. Inside the winter room, however, the atmosphere was warm, calm, and organized. People sat close to the heater, shared food, and comforted each other. Children listened to stories told by Tom and Lena, feeling safe despite the storm outside. Adults who had once mocked the shed now expressed gratitude and relief. Mark spoke quietly to Tom. "I see now why you built this room. It is not just walls and blankets. It is hope, care, and safety. People outside are struggling, but here, we are alive and warm." Tom nodded. "Yes, it is important to prepare. Safety is more valuable than pride or appearances. The storm does not care who is ready and who is not. It only matters if you are prepared." By late night, the winter room had become a small community. Several neighbors, exhausted from the storm, rested under thick blankets. Tom, Mark, and Lena continued to check supplies and monitor the radio. They had enough food, water, and warmth for everyone, and the heater ran steadily, keeping the room cozy despite the blizzard outside. Outside, the town faced its harshest hours. Snow continued to fall, and the wind whipped across rooftops. Some families who had stayed in unprepared homes suffered from the cold, while others struggled to reach safety. Tom's winter room had become the only safe place within the entire neighborhood. Despite the challenges, the people inside felt secure. They realized the importance of foresight and preparation. What had once been a private, hidden shed mocked by neighbors had become a life-saving refuge. It was a place of warmth, care, and hope during a storm that could have caused fear and despair. As the night deepened, the blizzard showed no sign of slowing. The town was trapped in snow, but inside the winter room, people were safe. The space was no longer just a shed. It was a symbol of careful planning, courage, and thoughtfulness. Tom looked around the room, quietly satisfied. He knew the storm could last another day, but everyone inside was prepared and safe. He had built more than walls, blankets, and supplies. He had built a place of safety, comfort, and life for anyone who needed it. Outside, the blizzard raged. Inside, the winter room glowed with warmth, laughter, and quiet hope. Tom had turned what was once hidden and mocked into a haven, showing that preparation and care could overcome even the strongest storm. The blizzard finally began to slow as the fourth day arrived. Snow still fell lightly, but the wind had calmed, and the town was visible again under a thick white blanket. Streets were filled with snow, and cars were buried, but the storm that had trapped the town for days was finally easing. Inside Tom's winter room, the atmosphere was warm and calm. The heater worked steadily, blankets were still plentiful, and food supplies were untouched thanks to careful rationing. Mark, Lena, and the neighbors who had sought refuge felt safe and comfortable. For days, this small shed had been their sanctuary, and now they could see that the storm's worst had passed. "Can you believe we survived this?" Lena asked, looking around at the others. She smiled as children played quietly near the heater. "We owe so much to you, Tom." Tom shook his head gently. "I did nothing special. I just prepared for the storm and followed my plan. Anyone can do this if they think ahead and care." Mark laughed softly. "I should have prepared like you. I thought it was silly before, but now I see how much it matters. You saved us all." Outside, the town was slowly beginning to stir. People emerged cautiously from their homes, carefully stepping over snowdrifts and fallen branches. Many homes had minor damages, and a few roofs had collapsed under the heavy snow. Streets were blocked, and clearing them would take time, but the townspeople were grateful that no lives had been lost. Mr. Allen, the elderly neighbor, stepped outside the winter room and looked at the snowy world. He smiled at Tom, holding his cane firmly. "I do not know how to thank you enough," he said. "Without your winter room, I do not know if I would have managed through this storm." Tom smiled politely. "You are safe now. That is what matters. We can help each other clear the snow and recover." Other neighbors slowly came out from their homes, drawn by the news that Tom's shed had been a safe place during the blizzard. Some of them were still shivering, and many had run out of food or water. They were welcomed inside the winter room one by one. Mark and Lena helped distribute blankets and tea, while Tom organized the supplies calmly. For the first time, the neighbors understood the value of preparation. The shed, once mocked as unnecessary, had proven its worth beyond imagination. It was not just a place to survive the storm, it was a place where people felt cared for, safe, and hopeful. Children laughed quietly as they drank warm tea and played near the heater. Adults shared stories of their experiences outside during the storm. Some had been trapped in their homes without heat, while others had struggled to reach safety. All of them looked at Tom with respect and gratitude. "It is amazing," said Lena. "You built more than a room. You built a place that saved lives." Tom shook his head. "I only did what I could to be ready. Nature can be powerful, and it does not wait for anyone. It is always better to prepare than to wait and hope." Mark looked out at the snowy streets. "I think everyone will remember this storm. And they will remember your winter room, Tom. You taught us an important lesson about being careful and thinking ahead." Outside, townspeople began to work together. Families shoveled snow from roofs and driveways, neighbors helped each other move fallen branches, and children gathered smaller debris. The community that had been trapped for days now felt a strong sense of unity, inspired by the safety and calm inside Tom's shed. Inside the winter room, Tom checked the food and water supplies one last time. Enough remained for anyone who still needed shelter until they could return home safely. The heater hummed quietly, warming the space, and the small group shared laughter and conversation. The shed had become more than a winter room, it had become a symbol of care, foresight, and community. By afternoon, the streets were gradually cleared enough for movement. People returned to their homes, carrying blankets, food, and gratitude with them. Many promised to prepare better in the future. Mark and Lena walked back to their houses carefully, reflecting on the past days. They realized how fortunate they had been to find safety in Tom's winter room. Even as the storm ended, the lesson remained. Preparation, thoughtfulness, and foresight had turned a small shed into a life-saving refuge. Neighbors who had once mocked Tom now respected him deeply. They had seen firsthand how one person's careful planning could protect many during a crisis. That evening, the town gathered quietly. People shared stories of survival, thanked those who had helped, and reflected on the storm. Tom stayed mostly in the background, quietly assisting others and ensuring everyone had what they needed. He did not seek praise or recognition, but his actions had already made him a hero in the eyes of the community. Mark approached Tom as the sun began to set. "I cannot thank you enough," he said sincerely. "You showed us what it means to be prepared. I will never forget it." Tom smiled gently. "It is not about thanks. It is about care. We help when we can, and we prepare for the worst. That is all anyone can do." Lena added, "You also taught us to think about others. The winter room saved more than just you. It saved everyone who came here. It is incredible." Tom nodded. "Safety grows when we care for each other. Preparation is not selfish. It is a way to protect those we can." As night fell, the town was quiet again. Snow still covered rooftops and streets, but the worst of the storm had passed. Families returned to their homes, children slept safely, and the streets were slowly cleared of snow. The town had survived, stronger and wiser. Inside the winter room, Tom, Mark, Lena, and the neighbors who had stayed through the storm sat together. They shared a simple meal, warm drinks, and stories of the past days. The room was still cozy, calm, and organized. What had been mocked as unnecessary had become a place of life, hope, and warmth. The blizzard had tested the town, but preparation and care had made all the difference. Tom's winter room, once a hidden shed, had become a symbol of foresight, courage, and kindness. It had shown that even in the harshest conditions, careful planning and thoughtfulness could protect lives and bring people together. Mark looked around at the winter room and said softly, "I will always remember this. Your foresight saved lives, Tom. Thank you for everything." Tom smiled quietly. "We survived because we were ready. Remember that. The storm teaches us to prepare and care. That is the real lesson." Lena nodded. "I will never underestimate preparation again. You showed us what it means to think ahead and help others." The group sat together, sharing warmth and quiet laughter. Outside, the town sparkled under a fresh layer of snow. Inside the winter room, everyone felt safe, grateful, and connected. What had started as a hidden shed for one man had become a lifeline for many. The storm had passed, but the lessons remained. Preparation, care, and foresight had turned fear into safety. Tom's winter room had been more than a room. It had been a place of hope, courage, and community. It had reminded everyone that in times of challenge, thinking ahead and caring for others could change everything. The night ended quietly. Snow covered the town, the wind was calm, and the streets were still thick with white. Inside the winter room, the people rested, warm and safe. Tom knew the storm had ended, but the lesson of the winter room would stay with everyone forever. It was no longer a secret. The neighbors who once mocked it now respected it. The children who had called it a cave now understood its value. The winter room had proven that careful preparation and thoughtfulness could overcome even the strongest storm. And in that quiet, warm room, the town had learned that safety, care, and foresight were the greatest strength anyone could have.